Transformation is a potent word, a powerful concept. But what does it mean in relation to a society? Can the spiritual DNA of a community really be altered? If so, what kind of features does this new blueprint produce? In this program, we'll attempt to answer these and other important questions. We'll visit several communities whose streets and institutions have lately been rattled by the power of the Holy Spirit. We'll examine both the causes and the effects of this most impressive phenomenon. To take us on this journey, we join noted investigative researcher George Otis Jr., a man who spent years reading signposts on the road to community transformation.
Community transformation is a concept that many Christians struggle with. But where does this tentativeness come from? My own observation is that it derives largely from the limitations of our own life experience. If you ask believers if they've experienced spiritual revival, most will say yes. Ask if they're convinced that large-scale church growth can happen, and they will invariably cite specific examples. But what almost no one has experienced, at least in the Western world, is a profound and pervasive transformation of their community. And as a result, we're inclined to think it's unattainable. But is this a valid assumption? I'd like to invite you to journey with me to 4 communities that have been dramatically altered by the power of the Holy Spirit. 4 communities that offer a shining example of what can happen when God comes to town.
Was well known as the drug capital of the world, and along with that all the violence and corruption, sin of every kind you can imagine. The violence was getting worse. The church was really feeling the pressure of what was going on.
So here in the Amazon, which is the Colombia Amazon, Brazilian Amazon, and Peruvian Amazon, this is where many of the laboratories, cocaine laboratories are.
Marcy and Randy McMillan are veteran ministers who have lived in Cali more than 20 years. At least 10 of them have been spent in the shadow of the city's infamous drug lords. They've seen the devastating effects of the cartel's ruthless control, and they've seen it right in their own backyard. When illicit drug money began pouring into Cali in the 1980s, the cocaine lords moved into the McMillans' upscale neighborhood, buying up entire blocks of luxurious haciendas.
Hey, Randy, this is an unbelievable place here over to the right. This wall looks like it's 20 to 25 feet high. Who lived here?
The Orjuela Rodriguez family, which are heads of the Cali cartel. During that period of their control over the country and cocaine and exportation involving, they said it, you know, 500 million a month was what they were doing every month, just on a regular month.
That's unbelievable.
Without anything special. And during that time, I mean, security and walls were everything for them. I mean, paranoia, fear.
For years, Colombia was the world's biggest exporter of cocaine, sending upwards of 1,000 tons a year to the United States and Europe. The U.S. Drug Enforcement Agency called the Cali cartel the largest, richest, and best organized criminal organization in history. With billions of dollars at their disposal, their reach was pervasive, especially in Cali itself.
They really controlled the whole socioeconomic situation, the political situation, and even very much the religious.
It was terrible. At that time, drug trafficking in Cali was one of the most powerful in the world. People would die easily. If you were riding around in a car and there was a confrontation, it was a miracle if you or the driver weren't killed. And people walked around full of fear. I personally saw 5 people killed in Cali.
There were many journalists who were killed for denouncing what the mafia was doing in Colombia. Important political decisions for the country were manipulated by drug trafficking money, influencing all aspects of society. It touched everything, absolutely everything.
You know, this is just one of 1,200 properties that they had in Cali.
To freely walk the streets that once held so much terror is testimony to the remarkable changes that have come to Cali. But where did it all begin? This story, like all transformation accounts, is rooted in the hearts of intercessors, men and women who had ears to hear what God was saying.
God spoke to us that we should come to Cali.
Ruth Roybal and her husband Julio came to Cali in 1978. They were dismayed at the utter darkness that had settled over the city. But Julio was convinced that if the people of God would join together and pray, the enemy's grip would be broken. There was just one problem. No one wanted to do this.
It wasn't really unity among the churches. You did your thing, and I say, God bless you, brother, and have a wonderful time in your church, but this is my church, and this is what I do.
The Pastors' Association used to consist of nothing more than a box of files. Every pastor was working separately on his own. No one would join together.
Following a disagreement, Julio pulled out of the already weak Pastors' Association. But then he realized he was contributing to the disunity.
God spoke to him and told him, you don't have the right to be offended, and you have to forgive. And he took that message and he realized, he said, if I'm going to reflect Jesus, I cannot be offended anyway.
Julio went back to the pastors and begged their forgiveness. They could not afford to walk in disunity, not when their city faced such overwhelming challenges.
We started realizing, well, what hope do we have? We had all these international organizations plus all the Colombian authorities against the Cali cartel, and nothing ever happened.
So being concerned for this, we started praying and interceding and asking the Lord to show us how to pray, and that's how He took us to understand our spiritual roots.
To gain God's perspective on their city, local churches began to examine the spiritual dynamics in their immediate neighborhoods.
One of the things we would do was Randy would give out maps of the city, and the government has it divided like in different areas, zones. And within those zones there are many neighborhoods, so we would divide the church up into these zones, and according to the neighborhood where they lived, and they had to bring back information of all of the problems that they saw that were occurring, that were reoccurring, very strong problems within their area.
One troubling discovery was the city's deep involvement with the occult. Even the macho drug lords were active clients of mediums and spiritual guides.
Had very strong roots of occultic practices, and that was mixed in with the religious leadership, and that gave them power, aside from the power that they already had with their money.
As they began to address specific strongholds over the city, Cali's pastors felt God leading them to assemble their people for an evening of joint worship and prayer.
At the beginning, the problem was people saying, it won't work, the people might not come. And many opposed it, but we had leaders that dared to do things. They dared, understanding that it was God's will.
In '95, we had our first all-night prayer meeting.
Did you feel the mountains tremble?
And they prayed against principalities and powers. They prayed for unity. They believed in God to see Him move in the churches.
The mayor at that time got on the platform, prayed for Cali and said, Cali belongs to Jesus Christ. And with those words, when the Christians heard them from the city authority, that was a confirmation of what the Holy Spirit was doing in the city.
48 hours after the event, the daily newspaper headlined, "No Homicides." For the first time in as long as anyone could remember, Cali had gone an entire weekend without a single murder. A newsworthy event in a city used to seeing upwards of 15 killings per day.
After these major prayer events, united prayer events were going on, that's when we started seeing the results.
And 10 days later, the first drug lord fell, and God was changing the city.
Encouraged by the spiritual momentum generated by the first all-night prayer vigil, church leaders decided to rent the largest venue in the city, the 55,000-seat Pascual Guerrero Soccer Stadium. Their faith was amply rewarded when more than 60,000 believers showed up to pray and worship across denominational lines.